Shelter dog hands. Her puppy to a visitor. What happened next will break your heart. At a small-town shelter, a scarred German Shepherd does something no one has ever seen before. She pushes her only puppy through the cage to a stranger's hands, and then cries. But what looks like a desperate plea hides a truth no one is prepared for. Because this mother dog isn't just protecting her pup, she's hiding a past that could change everything. As powerful forces close in to separate them forever, the stranger must decide, fight the system, or let the bond be torn apart. But with secrets buried deep and danger rising fast. Why did this dog choose her, and what will it cost to keep them together? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The rain drummed against the metal roof of the county shelter, creating a hollow symphony that echoed through the corridors. Nell Covington pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped inside, carrying a stack of old blankets that she'd collected from her linen closet. The familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with wet dog fur filled her nostrils, a scent she'd grown accustomed to during her weekly visits. At 68, Nell's steps were still steady, though slower than in her bus-driving days. Her gray hair, pulled back in a practical bun, had gotten damp on the short walk from her car to the entrance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she made her way down the concrete walkway between the kennels. Each cage told a story. Nell paused to read the intake cards, her heart heavy with each tale of abandonment or surrender. The sound of barking, whining, and the occasional crash of metal against metal filled the air. Some dogs pressed hopefully against their kennel doors, while others huddled in corners, their eyes reflecting fear or resignation. When she reached kennel number 13, something made her stop. The German Shepherd inside was larger than most, her coat marked with scars that spoke of a hard life. But it was the dog's eyes that caught Nell's attention, deep brown and filled with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The shepherd rose on trembling legs, her movements careful and deliberate. "Hey there, sweet girl," Nell said softly, crouching down despite her creaky knees. She noticed the intake card. Unadoptable, euthanasia in 24 hours, protective aggression. The words hit her like a physical blow. The shepherd moved closer to the kennel door, and Nell saw what she'd missed at first glance. A small puppy, no more than a few weeks old, huddled against its mother's side. The mother dog looked at Nell with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then, with gentle movements that spoke of desperate trust, the shepherd used her nose to guide her puppy towards the kennel bars. "What are you doing, girl?" Nell whispered, watching in amazement as the mother dog nudged her baby closer and closer to the gap in the bars. The puppy, a tiny version of its mother with oversized paws and soft fur, squeezed through the opening. Before Nell could react, the mother dog had effectively placed her baby in Nell's hands. The gesture was so deliberate, so filled with purpose, that Nell felt tears spring to her eyes. "Oh my," she breathed, carefully cradling the puppy. The little one squirmed and whimpered softly, but didn't try to escape. The mother shepherd pressed her forehead against the metal bars and let out a sound that broke Nell's heart. A cry so full of grief and desperation that it echoed through the kennel. It was a sound Nell recognized all too well, one that had torn from her own throat last summer when they'd told her about her son. A young shelter staffer approached, clipboard in hand. "That puppy's actually marked as adoptable," she said, pointing to a separate tag. "We can start the paperwork right away if you're interested." Nell looked down at the puppy in her arms, then back at the mother dog who hadn't moved her head from the bars. The shepherd's eyes were wet with tears, something Nell would have sworn was impossible before this moment. The sight triggered memories of her son, of the way he'd looked in his firefighter's uniform the last time she'd seen him, of his fierce dedication to protecting others. The Blackhedge fire had taken him, along with so many others. The pain of that loss surged through her chest, as fresh as it had been that terrible day. But now, watching this mother-dog sacrifice, something else rose alongside the grief: determination. "I need to speak to a supervisor," Nell said, her voice firm despite the emotion threatening to choke her. "Right now." "Ma'am?" The staffer looked confused. "These two need to stay together," Nell explained, gesturing to both mother and pup. "I want to know what can be done about this euthanasia order." The mother shepherd lifted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving Nell's face. In that moment, Nell felt something shift inside her: a connection, an understanding, a purpose. This dog had chosen her, had trusted her with the most precious thing in her world, just as Nell's son had chosen to protect others, even at the cost of his own life. The puppy snuggled closer to Nell's chest, seeking warmth. The mother dog watched, her posture a mixture of grief and hope. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof, but Nell barely heard it now. Her mind was already racing, planning, determining how to fight this battle. Because that's what it would be: a battle to save this mother's life, to keep this little family together. She knew the system, knew the challenges ahead. But standing there in the fluorescent-lit corridor, with a trembling puppy in her arms and the mother dog's trusting gaze upon her, Nell felt stronger than she had in months. The grief that had weighed her down since losing her son transformed into something else: a fierce determination to prevent another needless loss. "I'll wait right here," she told the staffer, who nodded and hurried off to find a supervisor. Nell shifted the puppy to one arm and reached through the bars with her free hand. The mother shepherd, despite her aggressive label, gently pressed her nose against Nell's palm. "We're going to figure this out," Nell promised softly, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You trusted me with your baby. Now I'm going to trust my heart about you." The shepherd's tail wagged slightly, the first hopeful gesture she'd shown since Nell arrived. The puppy yawned and snuggled closer, while the mother dog maintained her vigil at the kennel door. 3 hearts, connected by loss and hope, waited together in the rain-soaked silence of the county shelter. Nell squared her shoulders and followed the young staffer down the fluorescent-lit hallway toward the director's office. The puppy dozed in her arms, completely trusting, while distant barks echoed through the building. Her heart ached, thinking of the mother shepherd left behind in Kennel 13. Director Marta Greevy sat behind a desk crowded with files and forms, her glasses perched precariously on her nose. She glanced up from her computer screen, eyes narrowing at the sight of the puppy. "Mrs. Covington, I understand you have concerns about our procedures." Her tone was clipped, professional. Nell stepped forward. "I want to foster both dogs, the mother and this little one. They shouldn't be separated." "That's not our policy." Marta shuffled some papers on her desk. "We separate litters for adoption. It's standard practice, and that particular mother is marked unadoptable. She doesn't leave this facility." "But you can't just—" Nell caught herself, took a breath. "I saw her gentleness. She handed me her puppy through the bars. An aggressive dog wouldn't do that." Marta's expression hardened. "We have documented bite incidents during intake. The shepherd showed aggressive behavior toward our staff. The decision has been made." "I drove a school bus for 27 years, Nell countered, shifting the puppy in her arms. "I know the difference between meanness and fear. I've seen it in children's eyes, in parents' eyes, and I see it in that dog's eyes. She's terrified, not dangerous." The puppy stirred, letting out a tiny whimper. Nell gentled it with a soft touch, just as she'd done countless times with scared kindergartners on their first day of school. Mrs. Covington, while I appreciate your experience with children, this is different. We have protocols. The sharp click of dress shoes on linoleum interrupted them. A man appeared in the doorway, his expensive suit at odds with the shelter's institutional setting. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Nell's monthly pension. "Excuse me," he said, his smile practiced and gleaming. "I'm Royce. Bender. I understand you have a German Shepherd female, intake number Y13? Marta straightened in her chair. "Yes, we do. How can I help you?" Bender set his briefcase on the edge of her desk, popping it open to reveal neat stacks of papers. "I'm here to claim my property. I have the sale records right here." He pulled out several carbon copy forms, sliding them across the desk. Nell's stomach clenched. Something about this man set off every warning bell she'd developed in nearly 3 decades of watching over other people's children. Marta picked up the papers, comparing numbers and dates. Her frown deepened as she studied them. "These appear to be valid transfer documents." "Of course they are." Bender's smile never wavered. "I broker guard dogs for private security firms. That shepherd was part of a training program before she went missing. Pregnant dogs sometimes get confused, wander off." Nell stepped forward. She was found abandoned, half-starved. Bender's eyes flicked to her, then to the puppy, his expression calculating. "Ah, I see you have the pup. Well, as the mother's rightful owner, I'll be taking both." "The puppy's already been processed for adoption," Marta interrupted. "Our paperwork is complete on that." Something dark flashed across Bender's face before his smile returned. "No matter. The mother is my primary concern. She's valuable breeding stock." Nell felt sick. Breeding stock, like the dog was nothing more than a machine for making puppies. She pulled out her cell phone, fingers shaking slightly as she dialed. "Mrs. Covington, we're conducting business here," Marta said sharply. "I'm calling someone who needs to see these papers," Nell replied, pressing the phone to her ear. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Torin? It's Nell. I need you to come to the county shelter right away. Bring your knowledge about rescue documentation." She paused, listening. "Yes, now. Please." Torin Pike wasn't a man of many words, but he knew dogs, knew the darker side of breeding operations, and most importantly, knew how to spot questionable paperwork. As a mechanic, he'd seen enough fake repair documents to develop a 6th sense about such things. "Mrs. Covington," Marta began, "Mr. Bender's documentation is in order. We can't just—" "Please," Nell interrupted. "Just wait until he gets here. 15 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Bender's smile turned cold. "Director Greavy, I have a busy schedule. If my paperwork is in order, I'd like to collect my property and be on my way." Nell held her ground, the puppy now awake and watching the proceedings with bright eyes. She thought of the mother shepherd's tears, of the trust in those amber eyes when she'd handed over her baby. Something was wrong here. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd known when a storm was coming during her bus driving days. Marta looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. Finally, she sighed. 15 minutes. Won't hurt anything. We need to process the release forms anyway." Bender's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Very well. I'll review the release documents while we wait." Nell stayed right where she was, one hand protectively cradling the puppy, the other gripping her phone like a lifeline. Through the office window, she could see the rain still falling, making the world beyond look gray and uncertain. But she held on to hope, remembering the mother shepherd's gentle trust, and prayed that Torin would see what she sensed, that something about these papers, about this man, wasn't right. The clock on Marta's desk ticked away the minutes in tense silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and the puppy's occasional soft whimpers. Nell waited, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the next few minutes could determine not just the fate of these dogs, but perhaps something even bigger than that. The heavy door swung open, bringing in a gust of rain-laden wind and Torin Pike's solid presence. His work shirt was spotted with rain, and his eyes took in the scene with careful attention. Marta behind her desk, Bender with his precise suit and papers, and Nell standing firm with the puppy. "Thanks for coming," Nell said softly. Torin nodded, moving to stand beside her. His oil-stained hands were clean now, but some grease remained stubborn under his nails. He glanced at the puppy, then down the corridor toward Kennel 13. "Show me," he said simply. Nell led the way, aware of Bender's calculating gaze following them. The mother shepherd was still pressed against the bars, her amber eyes fixed on her puppy. When she saw Nell, her tail gave a slight wag, but her anxiety was clear in every trembling muscle. Torin studied the intake card, then the dog herself. He crouched down, letting her catch his scent. The shepherd's nose twitched, but she showed no aggression, only the same desperate concern for her baby. "What do you see?" Nell asked quietly. Torin's voice was low, meant just for her. "She's no junkyard dog. Look at how she carries herself. There's training there, but it's not attack training. And earlier, you said she gave you the pup? Right through the bars. She just knew. German shepherds are smart. Real smart." Torin straightened up. She knew exactly who she was choosing as her pup's protector. These dogs, they can read people better than most humans can. Before Nell could respond, quick footsteps approached. Bender appeared, holding up a receipt with a flourish. "Everything's in order," he announced. "I've paid the adoption fee for the puppy. Since I own the mother, it simplifies things considerably." Nell's heart dropped. "You can't." "I can and have." Bender's smile was razor-sharp. "The staff is processing it now. Director Greavy was quite helpful." A young shelter worker appeared with the puppy in a plastic carrier, looking uncomfortable but professional. "Here's your adoption packet, Mr. Bender. All the key initial vaccination records are included." As Bender reached for the carrier, the mother shepherd let out a sound that made everyone freeze. It wasn't just a howl, it was heartbreak given voice, a hoarse, shattering cry that echoed down the corridor. Other dogs joined in, creating a chorus of distress that had shelter workers peeking out of doors. The puppy whimpered, tiny paws scrabbling at the carrier's gate. Nell moved without thinking, reaching for the handle. "Please, you can't separate them." Bender smoothly tilted the carrier away, his movements practiced and precise. "Mrs. Covington," he said, voice dripping false sympathy. "I understand you're emotional, but these are my dogs now." "Mrs. Covington." Marta's voice cut through the cacophony. She'd followed them down the hall. "I must warn you about interfering with a legal adoption. Please don't make this difficult." Nell's hands fell to her sides, but her spine straightened. She watched as Torin quietly pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the kennel card, then turning slightly to capture Bender's retreating form. Through the window, she caught him documenting the truck's plates as well. The mother shepherd pressed herself against the bars until they had to be bruising her. Her whole body shook with desperate whines as her puppy disappeared down the hall. Nell moved closer to the kennel, placing her hand where the dog could reach it. The shepherd's rough tongue touched her fingers, a gesture of trust that broke something open inside Nell's chest. She thought of another mother, herself, watching her son leave for his last fire. The way he'd smiled, so confident, so brave. The way she'd never imagined it would be the last time. Grief and fury twisted together in her chest, forging themselves into something new, something unbreakable. "I'm not letting you take her child," she whispered, the words barely audible but filled with iron certainty. The shepherd's ears pricked forward, catching her voice. Their eyes met, human and dog, sharing the same determined flame. Torin's steady presence remained beside her, his silence supportive rather than empty. Together they watched the mother shepherd press against the bars, her body trembling but her gaze never leaving the direction her puppy had gone. The hollow sound of the shelter's front door echoing closed seemed to trigger something in her. She sank to the concrete floor, her head lowered but her eyes still fixed on that last point of contact. The corridor slowly emptied of staff, everyone eager to escape the heavy emotion hanging in the air. Even Marta retreated to her office, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm that spoke of her discomfort with the whole situation. But Nell stayed, one hand still extended through the bars, sharing what comfort she could with a mother who'd just lost everything. The rain continued its steady pattern on the metal roof, a counterpoint to the shepherd's quiet whimpers. Each sound was another crack in Nell's heart, but also another brick in the foundation of her resolve. She'd lost her own child to fate and fire. She wouldn't stand by and watch another mother lose hers to cold bureaucracy and questionable paperwork. The shepherd pressed her head against Nell's palm, and in that touch was a world of trust and desperate hope. The dog had chosen her, had seen something in her that promised safety and protection. Nell couldn't let that trust be in vain. The quiet of the shelter corridor was broken by hesitant footsteps. A young man in a blue shelter uniform approached, clutching a handheld scanner to his chest like a shield. Nell recognized him as one of the junior aides who had been watching everything unfold from the shadows. "Mrs. Covington?" His voice was soft but steady. "I'm Hollis Vance. I work the afternoon shift here." He glanced nervously down the hallway before continuing. "Something's been bothering me about this whole situation." The shepherd lifted her head from where she'd been lying, pressed against the bars, her ears pricking forward with interest. Hollis noticed, and gave her a gentle smile. "Earlier, during intake, we couldn't get her chip to register. It happens sometimes. Old chips fail or the scanner acts up." He held up the device in his hands. "But would you mind if I tried again? Something just feels off about all this." Nell nodded, hope flickering in her chest. "Of course." Hollis crouched down by the kennel, careful to move slowly. The shepherd watched him with intelligent eyes, but showed no sign of the aggressive behavior noted on her card. He passed the scanner over her shoulder area once, twice, and then a sharp electronic chirp broke the silence. "There." His fingers flew over the device's screen. "We've got a number. Let me check the database." Nell held her breath as Hollis pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. The shepherd stayed perfectly still, as if she knew the importance of this moment. Suddenly, Hollis's face went pale. "Oh my God," he whispered. His hands were shaking slightly as he turned the phone screen toward Nell. She's one of ours. County Search and Rescue K-9 unit. Call sign Yankee 13. The air seemed to vanish from Nell's lungs. "Search and rescue? From where?" She was... Hollis swallowed hard. She was listed as missing in action during the Blackhedge fire last summer. The words hit Nell like a physical blow. The Blackhedge fire. The same inferno that had taken her son. She stared at the shepherd, at Y-13, with new understanding. No wonder those eyes had seemed to hold such depths of loss and knowledge. "Hold on," Hollis said, hurrying to a nearby office. I'm printing her full record. The printer hummed to life, spitting out several pages that Hollis gathered and handed to Nell with reverent care. Her eyes scanned the document, taking in details that painted a picture of extraordinary service. Exceptional tracking abilities, she read, aloud. Advanced flood response training, unbroken partner rating. Her voice caught. What does that mean? It means she never failed to find her target, Hollis explained softly. Never lost a trail, never gave up on a search. She was one of the best. What happened to the unit? Hollis's expression darkened. Budget cuts, politics. They disbanded the whole search and rescue K9 division just a few months after the fire. A lot of good dogs got sold off, or worse. Nell's hands tightened on the papers. There's a contact number here for the unit. That would be Captain Rhea Calder, Hollis said. She fought hard against the disbanding. Last I heard, she'd retired rather than accept a transfer to regular patrol. With trembling fingers, Nell pulled out her phone and dialed the number. It rang several times before clicking over to voicemail. A crisp, professional voice spoke. You've reached Rhea Calder, retired captain of the county search and rescue K9 unit. Leave a message. Nell took a deep breath, aware that Wyethrine's eyes were fixed on her face. Captain Calder, my name is Nell Covington. I'm at the county shelter with one of your dogs, Y13. She's alive, but she needs help. There's a man claiming ownership, trying to separate her from her puppy. Please, if you're there, we need you. The message felt like a flare shot into a dark sky, a signal of desperate hope. As she ended the call, Y13 pressed closer to the bars, her tail giving a single gentle wag. Nell reached through and stroked her head, noting how the dog leaned into her touch with complete trust. I don't understand, Nell said, turning to Hollis. How did a highly trained search and rescue dog end up here? And why didn't anyone recognize what she was? Hollis shook his head, frustration evident in his features. The chip shouldn't have failed earlier. And these intake forms... He picked up the kennel card. They're not even filled out properly. No mention of scanning for a chip, no proper behavioral assessment. It's like someone wanted to push her through the system as quickly as possible. Y13 whined softly, pressing her nose against Nell's palm. The gesture seemed to carry weight beyond simple affection, as if the dog was trying to communicate something vital. The Blackhead fire, Nell whispered, more to herself than to Hollis. My son, he was there too, Station 13's first response team. She looked into Y113's eyes, seeing a reflection of her own grief there. Maybe that's why you chose me. You understand what it means to lose everything to those flames. Hollis cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Covington, what are you going to do? Nell straightened her spine, tucking the printed records carefully into her purse. First, we're going to keep these safe. Then we're going to wait for Captain Calder to call back. And if she doesn't... She reached through the bars one more time, letting Y13's warm breath ghost across her fingers. Then we'll figure out another way. Because I'm not letting anyone else be lost to that fire. Not today. The shepherd's tail wagged again, more firmly this time. In the fluorescent lights of the shelter corridor, her eyes seemed to glow with a mixture of intelligence and determination that matched Nell's own. They were two mothers who had lost too much, and neither of them was willing to lose anything more. The shelter's rain-warped sign creaked in the wind as a weathered SUV pulled into the parking lot. Through the streaked windows, Nell watched a woman emerge, moving with military precision despite the weather. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a jacket bearing faded search and rescue patches. Captain Rhea Calder didn't waste time on pleasantries. Where is she? Nell led the way through the echoing corridors, their footsteps mixing with the drumming rain overhead. When they reached Kennel 13, Y-13 rose to her feet, ears forward. Rhea's weathered face showed the first crack of emotion. She positioned herself squarely in front of the kennel and spoke in clear, commanding German. Platz! The shepherd immediately dropped into a perfect down position. Bleib! Rhea waited 3 beats. Sitz! Y-13's response was instant. She sat, alert and focused, muscle memory overriding months of trauma. Rhea's hands gripped the bars. That's my girl, she whispered. Then, louder. Where's her paperwork? Marta appeared with the file, hovering uncertainly as Rhea flipped through Royce's documents. The former captain's jaw tightened with each page. This is garbage, she said finally. Half these transfer papers are carbon copies with no originals. The dates don't align. And this signature? She held up a page. That's supposedly from our unit's dissolution auction, but I was there for every sale. Y-13 was already listed as missing in action. The numbers seem to match our intake procedures, Marta defended weakly. Numbers can be faked, Rhea snapped. What can't be faked is years of specialized training. Did anyone here even attempt to assess her properly? Run her through basic commands? Check her working history? Hollis stepped forward, clutching the printed records. I found her chip data, Captain. But something was wrong with our scanner earlier. It wouldn't read. Convenient, Rhea muttered. She turned to Nell. You said there's a puppy? Royce took her, Nell replied, anger coloring her voice. Paid the adoption fee right away, while we were still arguing about Y-13's status. Of course he did. Rhea's expression darkened. I've heard of Royce Bender. He specializes in flipping working dogs, buys them cheap through questionable channels, sells them at massive profit to private security firms. No questions asked about their origins or training. Torin, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I got photos of his truck plates and paperwork, and I know some folks who might have seen other dogs move through. His operation. Good. Rhea nodded. We'll need everything we can get. These dogs, they're not just equipment to be auctioned off. Y-13 saved dozens of lives. She pulled children from floodwaters, tracked lost hikers in blizzards, searched through fire and smoke. Her voice caught. And when budget cuts came, they treated our partners like surplus gear. Thunder rolled overhead as Nell, Torin, Hollis, and Rhea formed a tight circle in the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting harsh shadows. Here's what we need, Rhea began, her tone shifting to tactical precision. First, an emergency hold on any movement of Y-13. Hollis, can you file that? The young aide nodded eagerly. I'll cite the chip data and SR registration as grounds for investigation. Good. Torin, gather those witnesses. We need affidavits about Royce's operation. Dates, locations, any documentation of violations. I'll start making calls, Torin confirmed. Nell. Rhea turned to her. You're our key witness for Y-13's current behavior and the puppy situation. We need detailed statements about everything you've observed, especially her willingly giving you the pup. That shows sound judgment, not the aggression they claimed. Nell squared her shoulders. I'll write down every detail. From a nearby radio at the front desk, a weather alert crackled. Severe storm warning remains in effect. Flooding possible in low-lying areas. Residents advised to prepare for potential evacuation. Y-13 whined softly from her kennel, head cocked toward the radio. Rhea's expression softened as she looked at her former partner. The system failed her, Rhea said quietly. Failed all our dogs. Decades of service reduced to line items on a spreadsheet. But we're going to fight this. Not just for Y-13 and her pup, but for every working dog treated like a commodity. Marta, who had been hovering on the periphery, cleared her throat. I should have looked more closely at those papers. Yes, you should have, Rhea agreed bluntly. But you can help make it right. We need official documentation of intake procedures not being followed, behavioral assessments being skipped. The shelter director nodded slowly. I'll pull the files. Another crack of thunder shook the building, where 13 remained steady, her eyes fixed on the group with intelligent focus. In her bearing, Nell could see echoes of the hero she had been, and still was. We'll need to move fast, Rhea warned. Royce won't sit idle once he realizes we're challenging his claim. He's got money and connections. But we've got the truth, Nell replied firmly. And a mother who chose to trust me with her baby. That has to count for something. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. In her kennel, Y13 stood at attention, as if ready for a mission. Looking at her, Nell felt the weight of what they were really fighting for. Not just one dog and her puppy, but a principle. A statement about loyalty and duty, about what happened when systems valued profit over partnership. They had become an unlikely team. A retired bus driver, a former SAR captain, a quiet mechanic, and a young shelter aide. But watching Y13's unwavering focus, Nell knew they were exactly the team this shepherd deserved. The team sprang into action with urgent purpose. Hollis rushed to his computer terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard as he drafted the emergency hold paperwork. His face was set with determination as he carefully cited public safety concerns and Y13's prior search and rescue designation. We need to emphasize the public safety angle, he muttered, scrolling through database fields. A trained SAR dog with flood response skills. That's not just any shelter intake. There are protocols for handling working dogs. Rhea pulled a chair beside him, her military precision evident in every movement. She began dictating specific details about Y13's training and certification history, while Hollis typed. Note the retention expectations for certified K9 units, she instructed. Even after disbandment, there are requirements about maintaining chain of custody and ensuring appropriate placement. Her voice carried the weight of years of experience as she crafted detailed affidavits about Y13's capabilities and service record. Meanwhile, Torin headed to the county records office, his quiet efficiency masking fierce determination. He spent an hour pulling files, building a pattern of citations against Royce's kennel operations. The evidence painted a troubling picture: multiple violations for overcrowding, sanitation issues, and most tellingly, a pattern of unusually rapid transfers of dogs through his facility. Look at these dates, he showed Nell later, spreading papers across a break room table. Dogs coming in and going out within 24 hours. No time for proper evaluation or conditioning. He's running them through like inventory. Nell nodded grimly as she held her phone to her ear, on hold with the clerk's office. When someone finally answered, she carefully verified every filing requirement, taking detailed notes. They couldn't afford any procedural mistakes that might give Royce an advantage. Yes, I understand, she said firmly. 3 copies, notarized, with supporting documentation, and the filing deadline is 5 o'clock today. She checked her watch. They had 4 hours. The team reconvened in the shelter corridor, sharing their findings. Hollis emerged from the office with Marta, who wore an expression of reluctant compliance as she approached Y13's kennel. The hold is officially filed, Hollis announced, watching as Marta pinned a bright yellow temporary hold notice to Y13's card. The shepherd watched the process intently, her intelligent eyes following every movement. Their small victory was short-lived. Within the hour, Royce's polished shoes clicked against the shelter's linoleum as he strode into the lobby. His practiced smile vanished when he saw the hold notice, replaced by a sneer that twisted his features. A hold, he demanded, pulling out his phone. Based on what grounds? Marta started to explain, but Royce was already dialing, turning away to speak in low, urgent tones. The team watched as he paced, his free hand gesturing emphatically. "Remember," he said clearly as he ended his call, fixing Marta with a stern look. "You've already accepted payment and processed paperwork. The shelter could face serious liability for interfering with a legal transfer of property." Marta's face paled slightly, but she stood her ground, glancing at the growing stack of documentation the team had assembled. They worked systematically through the afternoon, organizing their evidence into a comprehensive packet for the judge. Ria's affidavits detailed Y-13's training and value. Torin's records showed the suspicious pattern of Royce's operations. Hollis contributed shelter intake documents and the chip scan results. Nell wrote a passionate but clear account of the shepherd's behavior with her puppy. "We need 5 complete copies," Ria directed, laying out the papers in ordered stacks. "Everything numbered and indexed. Make it easy for the judge to follow the timeline." The courier was scheduled for 4:30, cutting it close to the filing deadline, but giving them maximum time to perfect their documentation. The hold would only last 24 hours, a brief window of opportunity they had to make count. While the others worked on the packets, Nell sat beside Kennel 13, speaking softly to Y-13 through the bars. The shepherd lay close, pressing against the metal, as if trying to absorb every word of comfort. "We're going to fix this," Nell promised, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to get your baby back. You trusted me with her, and I won't let you down." Y-13's tail thumped once against the concrete floor, her eyes never leaving Nell's face. Despite everything she'd been through, the fire, the auction, the separation from her puppy, there was still such dignity in her bearing, such intelligence in her gaze. "You know what we're doing, don't you?" Nell murmured. "You understand we're fighting for you." The shepherd shifted closer, pressing her forehead against Nell's fingers through the bars. The gesture held such gentle trust that Nell's eyes welled with tears. Time ticked by with agonizing slowness. They could hear Royce making more calls from the lobby, his voice carrying an edge of controlled anger. Marta fluttered between her office and the front desk, clearly torn between procedure and pressure. "The courier's 10 minutes out," Hollis reported, checking his phone. He'd been obsessively tracking the driver's progress through the delivery app. They did one final check of the packets. Everything was organized, labeled, copied, and secured in labeled envelopes. Ria reviewed each set with military precision, while Torin double-checked the supporting exhibits. "Remember," Ria said quietly, "this hold buys us hours, not days. But hours matter. Hours might be enough to get in front of the right judge, enough to prove what Royce is really doing." Nell nodded, still sitting beside Y-13's kennel. The shepherd had barely moved, maintaining her vigilant watch over the proceedings. Her composure, her steadfast presence, made their mission feel even more vital. They had assembled their evidence, documented the truth, and created their chance. Now they just had to make those precious hours count. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as evening crept in, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floors. Royce's countermove came swift and calculated, delivered through hushed conversations and carefully positioned paperwork. Hollis caught fragments while restocking supplies, his presence ignored by staff who saw him as just another junior aide. He lingered near the front desk, pretending to sort intake forms while straining to hear the whispered exchanges. "Dawn transfer, full documentation, expedited removal." The words drifted like poison through the air. A clipboard appeared with fresh papers, bearing Royce's signature in bold strokes. Tomorrow at sunrise, they would take Y-13. But that wasn't all. Hollis's stomach dropped when he overheard a phone call about moving the younger subject, to a secure location overnight. The puppy. They were hiding the puppy. He hurried back to where Nell sat, vigilant beside Kennel 13, her shoulders wrapped in a gray fleece blanket. Her phone lay charging nearby, ready for any news from their team. Where 13 pressed close to the bars beside her, both of them a picture of patient determination. "They're moving faster than we thought," Hollis said in a low voice, crouching down beside them. "Royce has arranged to remove Y-13 at dawn, and the puppy—" He swallowed hard. "They're relocating her tonight, somewhere we won't be able to find her easily." Nell's face tightened with worry as she pulled out her phone to alert the others. The wind outside had picked up significantly, rattling the shelter's metal roof and sending leaves scraping across windows. Thunder rolled in the distance, promising worse weather to come. Rhea called back immediately. "I'm heading to get one more signature we need. Jack Morton, former county commissioner who oversaw the SAR program. He'll verify Y-13's service record and the improper disposal of county assets when they auctioned the dogs." "Where is he?" Nell asked, hearing the strain in Rhea's voice. "That's the problem. He's out doing storm duty checks on the flood-prone areas. I'm trying to track him down, but this weather isn't helping. Keep me posted if anything changes there." The call ended, leaving them with the growing sounds of the storm. Torin arrived shortly after, his work, boots leaving wet prints on the floor. He'd come straight from his garage, still smelling of motor oil and carrying several heavy-duty toe straps. "Force of habit," he explained, setting the straps aside. "Never know when you might need them in weather like this. I've got the truck fueled up and ready if we need to move fast." He glanced at the darkening windows. "Storm's building faster than predicted. They're saying possible flash floods by morning." Marta appeared briefly, clipboard in hand, but turned away quickly when she saw them gathered near Kennel 13. Nell called out to her, but the director just shook her head. "I can't discuss anything further," she said, not quite meeting their eyes. "Policy and safety protocols are clear. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Hours crept by with agonizing slowness. The storm intensified, rain hammering against the roof in waves. Thunder crashed closer now, making the fluorescent lights flicker. Each time Nell's phone lit up with a message, they gathered hopefully, only to receive updates about more delays. Rhea was still chasing down Jack Morton, following his storm check route from site to site. The rising wind and worsening visibility slowed her progress. Every minute lost felt like another nail in their hopes. Hollis paced the corridor, checking and rechecking the paperwork queued for morning. The release forms sat ready, waiting only for dawn and final signatures. Each time he passed the front desk, he noted more storm warnings piling up on the office radio. Y-13 remained alert despite the late hour, her eyes following every movement in the hallway. When thunder shook the building particularly hard, she pressed closer to the bars near Nell, offering comfort even in her own uncertainty. "I'm not leaving," Nell said softly, adjusting her blanket. Her voice carried the same quiet determination she'd used with frightened children on her bus route during storms. "They'll have to work around me in the morning." Torin brought coffee from a nearby gas station, the cups steaming in the air-conditioned hallway. He'd made another supply run, adding flashlights and batteries to their collection. The weather report on his truck radio had warned of possible power outages. "Jack's checking the Miller Creek crossing now," Rhea reported in her latest update. "Should be his last stop, if I can just catch up to him." But the storm was moving faster than anyone had predicted. Wind howled through every gap in the building's aging structure. Rain fell in sheets so heavy they could barely see the parking lot lights through the windows. The night literally broke open around them. Thunder crashing overhead, transformers popping in the distance, tree branches scraping against walls. Nature itself seemed to be racing their deadline, adding its own urgency to their vigil. Nell checked her phone. 11:47 in the evening. Less than 6 hours until dawn. Less than 6 hours to secure the injunction that would protect Y-13. Less than 6 hours to prevent Royce from splitting this family permanently. Y-13's tail thumped softly against the concrete floor, the sound nearly lost in the storm's fury. She hadn't slept, hadn't moved from her post beside Nell. Whatever came with the dawn, they would face it together. The shelter creaked and groaned under the storm's assault. Leaves and small branches skittered past the windows, driven by the relentless wind. Another transformer exploded somewhere in the distance, painting the low clouds with a brief purple flash. Hollis brought more coffee and a handful of granola bars from the break room. They ate without really tasting anything, their attention split between phones, weather, and the steady tick of time moving forward. "We should be ready," Torin said quietly, checking his toe straps again. "Whatever happens with the paperwork, that storm's going to cause problems by morning. Might need every option we can get." Thunder crashed again, closer than ever. The lights flickered, steadied, then flickered again. A warning of things to come as the night stormed toward dawn. The storm struck with devastating force just after midnight. Thunder exploded overhead like artillery fire, making the shelter's walls shudder. Rain hammered against the roof in deafening sheets, drowning out all other sounds except for the increasingly worried whines of the animals. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then stuttered in a desperate dance. With a final buzz, they died completely, plunging the shelter into darkness. A heartbeat later, emergency lights sputtered to life, washing the corridors in an eerie red glow that reflected off the increasingly wet floor. "That's not just rain coming in," Torin said, his voice tight as he watched water beginning to seep under doorways and through small gaps in the walls. The creeping flood moved with frightening speed, spreading across the concrete floor like searching fingers. Nell pressed closer to Y-13's kennel, her heart pounding. "We need to get these animals to higher ground." As if in answer, hurried footsteps splashed down the hallway as shelter staff rushed to respond to the crisis. Gates rattled as they began evacuating the most vulnerable animals first: the elderly, the sick, the very young. Voices called out instructions that echoed off the walls, mixing with the storm's fury. "West Wing is flooding fast," someone shouted. "Move them to the upper kennels." Nell turned to help, but her foot hit a slick patch where water met cleaning solution. Her arms windmilled as she lost her balance. The world tilted sideways in terrible slow motion. Her head struck the concrete with a sickening crack that sent starbursts exploding across her vision. She lay there dazed, barely aware of the water now actively flowing across the floor. It rose with frightening speed, cold against her cheek. Through blurred vision, she saw Y-13 ram her shoulder against her kennel gate again and again. The shepherd's powerful body slammed into the metal with desperate determination. With a screech of protesting metal, the hinge finally gave way. Y-13 burst free, but instead of running, she went straight to Nell. The dog's wet nose pressed urgently against Nell's face, pushing and nudging until her head was lifted above the rising water. "Good girl," Nell mumbled, still fighting to clear her vision. "Smart girl." Y-13 disappeared for a moment, then returned, something clutched carefully in her teeth. She dropped a ring of keys next to Nell's hand. They must have fallen from someone's belt during the evacuation. The metal clinked against the wet floor. Torin appeared through the red-tinted gloom, wading through water that now reached mid-calf. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees, snatched the keys with his teeth since his hands were full of rescue equipment, and lunged for the nearest gate. His shoulder strained as he forced it open against the water's pressure. "Can you stand?" he called to Nell, reaching for her arm. "We need to—" A shadow moved through the emergency lighting. Royce Bender emerged from the chaos like a shark sensing blood in the water. His expensive shoes were ruined, his suit soaked, but his eyes held calculating purpose as they fixed on Y-13. "Perfect timing," he said, voice barely audible above the storm. "No power, no cameras, no witnesses. You're coming with me, dog." He moved forward with practiced confidence. Torin shifted to block his path. "Back off, Bender. This isn't the time." "Get out of my way, mechanic." Royce's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You have no legal right to interfere." "Neither do you," Torin growled. "Those papers of yours wouldn't hold up under real scrutiny." Royce's response was physical rather than verbal. He charged forward, catching Torin off guard. The impact sent both men crashing into the wall. Torin's head bounced off the concrete with a sound that made Nell's stomach lurch. At that moment, her phone buzzed. Through still blurry vision, she read the text that had somehow pushed through despite the storm. "Injunction denied. Missing required signature." "Nothing more we can do tonight." The water level climbed steadily, now splashing at everyone's knees. Outside, sirens wailed closer, emergency vehicles responding to the flash flood. Their lights strobed through the windows, adding blue and white flashes to the red emergency glow. Royce absorbed the situation with the quick assessment of a predator. His plans were clearly accelerating, adapting to the chaos around them. Without another word, he turned toward the exit, that cold smile still playing across his face. He knew he didn't need to fight now. He just needed to wait. The law was on his side, and Dawn wasn't far away. "Nell," Torin called, shaking off the impact as he waded back to her. "We need to get you checked out. That head wound." "I'm okay," she insisted, though the world still swam slightly. She clutched Y-13's wet fur for support as the shepherd pressed against her leg. "But we need to move. The water's still rising." More sirens joined the first, their urgent wailing a counterpoint to the thunder that still shook the building. The storm showed no signs of weakening, and the night was far from over. Through the red-lit corridors, shelter staff continued their frantic evacuation efforts. Gates clanged, animals whimpered, and water gurgled as it found new paths into the building. Y-13 stayed pressed to Nell's side, eyes alert, ready to steady her if she stumbled again. The emergency lights cast their blood-colored glow across the rising flood, turning the water into something that looked far more ominous than simple rain. It swirled around their legs, carrying debris and forcing them to move with careful deliberation to maintain their footing. Through the shelter's glass doors, flashing lights painted the parking lot in strobes of red and blue. 2 sheriff's deputies waded through the rising water, their uniforms already soaked. They carried pet carriers and directed remaining staff toward higher ground. "Ma'am, we need to clear the building," one deputy called to Nell. "Flash flood warning's been upgraded. Creek's already breached its banks up by Miller's Road." But Nell barely heard him, her eyes fixed on the empty space where Royce's truck had been parked. The puppy, Y-13's baby, was gone with him into the storm. Hollis burst through the doors, rain streaming from his hair. He clutched a wrinkled paper to his chest, trying to protect it from the downpour. His face was flushed from running. "They denied it," he panted, showing them the soggy printout. "Missing signature from Commissioner Walsh. Ria's still trying to track him down, but—" He shook his head, water flying from his hair. The throbbing in Nell's head intensified as she tried to focus on the paper. The words swam before her eyes, but the bright red "denied" stamp was clear enough. She pressed a hand to the tender spot where she'd struck the floor. Beside her, Y-13 let out a thin, keening whine. The shepherd's eyes were locked on the road, her ears pricked forward. She knew. She could sense her puppy moving further away with each passing second. Nell's hand went to her tote bag, fingers finding the familiar shape within. Her son's search and rescue whistle, the one they'd given her after the Blackhead fire. She'd never been able to bring herself to throw it away, carrying it like a talisman of memory. The metal was cool against her palm as she pulled it out. Rain pelted her face as she stepped outside, but she barely felt it. With a deep breath, she raised the whistle to her lips and blew one clean, piercing note that cut through the storm's chaos. Y-13's whole body transformed, her ears snapped forward, muscles tensing. The lost, grieving mother vanished, replaced by the trained professional she'd once been. Her eyes held a new focus, the awakening of deeply ingrained skills. Without hesitation, the shepherd surged forward. Her nose worked the wet pavement, picking up the truck's scent trail despite the rain. She moved with absolute certainty, like she was following a line only she could see. "Torin!" Nell called, already moving to follow the dog. "Your truck!" Torin and Hollis were already running for the mechanic's pickup. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain. Y-13 led the way on foot, with Nell close behind her. They splashed through deepening puddles, focused only on keeping the shepherd's dark form in sight. The pickup's tires sprayed water as Torin pulled alongside them. "Get in!" he shouted through the open window. "We'll lose them in this weather." Nell grabbed the handle and hauled herself into the back seat, then reached to help Y-13 scramble in after her. The shepherd's wet fur pressed against her as the dog wedged herself into the footwell, nose still working, still tracking. "Which way?" Hollis asked from the front passenger seat, wiping condensation from the windshield. Y-13's head snapped to the right, and she gave 2 sharp barks. "East on Miller's Road," Nell translated, remembering how her son had explained SR dog signals. "She's got the scent." Torin threw the truck into gear, and they surged forward. Rain hammered the roof, but Y-13 remained focused, her training crystallizing into pure purpose. Every few minutes, she would bark new directions, leading them through the storm-lashed streets. The pickup's wipers fought to clear the windshield as Torin drove with careful intensity. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but his voice was steady. "We'll find them," he said. "That dog knows what she's doing." Nell pressed her hand against Y-13's damp fur, drawing strength from the shepherd's unwavering focus. Her head still throbbed, but adrenaline was burning away the fog. In its place, a fierce clarity took hold, the same determination she'd seen in her son's eyes before every SAR mission. "The creek's rising fast," Hollis reported, checking his phone. "They're closing roads all over the county, if Royce is heading for his kennel facility." "He'll have to take the valley route," Torin finished. "Only way out that's still open." Y-13 barked sharply, 3 quick sounds, and pointed her nose left. "Valley Road," Nell confirmed. "She knows where he's going." Torin took the turn, tires fighting for grip on the wet pavement. The truck's headlights caught sheets of rain and the occasional glint of standing water. Thunder cracked overhead, but Y-13 remained steady, focused only on her mission. The dark shapes of trees whipped past as they followed the valley's curve. Somewhere ahead in the storm, a truck carried a puppy away from its mother. But with each mile, with each confident bark from Y-13, they drew closer. Nell touched the whistle again, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to have triggered such a profound change in the shepherd. But she understood, some bonds, some duties, ran deeper than fear or loss. They lived in the heart, waiting only for the right signal to awaken. The pickup's engine growled as they pressed on through the storm, where Y-13's wet nose tracked invisible signs in the air. and Nell silently thanked her son for teaching her to recognize the fierce dedication that drove both human and canine rescuers, the unwavering focus that now guided their desperate pursuit into the heart of the storm. Lightning split the sky as they approached the crossroads, illuminating a familiar figure standing in the rain beside a mud-spattered SUV. Rhea Calder's presence materialized like an answer to their prayers, her headlights cutting ghost-white paths through the downpour. "Pull over," Nell shouted, recognizing the former search and rescue captain's stance even through the storm. Torin guided the truck to a stop, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Y-13's ears pricked forward, her nose still working the wind from the truck bed where she tracked despite the deluge. Rhea jogged to them, clutching a waterproof document sleeve against her chest. Rain plastered her gray hair to her face, but her eyes held fierce triumph. "Got it," she called over the storm's roar. "The retention clause, signed and notarized." Nell's heart leapt as Rhea yanked open the passenger door and climbed in beside Hollis. Water cascaded from her rain jacket as she spread the document across the dashboard. The interior lights revealed official letterhead and a fresh signature at the bottom. "County retains permanent interest in all search and rescue canines," Rhea explained, jabbing her finger at the key paragraph. "Even after disbandment, it's buried in the original training agreements. Took me 3 hours to dig it up, but Judge Martinez remembered signing it. This voids any private sale or transfer. Royce's ownership claim is worthless." Torin grabbed the document sleeve and secured it to his dash with a piece of duct tape. "How far ahead is he?" "Deputy Weber spotted his truck 10 minutes ago, heading for the old river bridge," Hollis reported, phone pressed to his ear. "It's the fastest route to the county line, but they've got flood warnings all through that sector. Roadbed's probably compromised." "He'll risk it," Nell said, remembering the cold calculation in Royce's eyes. "He knows we're coming. He'll take any chance to get that puppy across the border." Y-13's bark cut through the drumming rain, sharp, insistent. The shepherd's body was rigid with focus as she tracked from the truck bed, nose held high to catch the scent through the wet wind. "She's got him," Rhea confirmed, recognizing the trained alert. "That's her pursuit signal." Torin gunned the engine, tires spinning before finding purchase. "Weber can meet us there?" "He's approaching from the north side," Hollis confirmed. "Says to be careful, whole valley's flooding. Bridge approach might be underwater already." The truck surged forward, wipers fighting the sheeting rain. Nell gripped the door handle as they took the curves, watching Y-13 brace herself in the truck bed. The shepherd's dedication burned like a flame through the storm. Mother's love transformed into professional purpose. "5 minutes to the bridge," Torin called out, checking his mirrors. "Plan?" "Simple," Rhea answered. "Block his exit, present the retention clause. Hold position until Weber arrives with backup. By law, that puppy and Y-13 are still county property. He's got nowhere to go." Lightning flashed again, revealing the valley's flooding extent. Water sheeted across fields and crept up roadside embankments. The storm's violence had transformed familiar landscape into treacherous territory. Nell's phone chirped, another emergency alert. "Flash flood warning," she read. "All bridges potentially compromised. Immediate evacuation recommended from low-lying areas." "Look," Hollis pointed through the windshield. Ahead, brake lights glowed red through the rain. Royce's truck, moving fast despite the conditions. Y-13's bark sharpened with recognition. In the truck bed, she pressed against the back window, every muscle taut with focus. The training that had once saved lives was now laser-focused on saving her puppy. They gained ground steadily, Torin's skill matching Royce's desperate speed. The old bridge appeared through the rain, a concrete span across the swollen river. Water already lapped at its approaches, dark and debris-filled. "Weber's 2 minutes out," Hollis reported. Says the north approach is going under. Rhea's jaw set in a hard line. We don't have 2 minutes. Royce hits that bridge, we lose them both. The truck's headlights caught Royce's vehicle as it fishtailed slightly, fighting for traction on the wet road. The bridge loomed closer, a gray mass in the storm. Signs flashed past. Caution, flood-prone area and bridge may be unsafe when flooded. I-13's barking took on a new urgency. Through the back window, Nell could see the shepherd's eyes fixed on Royce's truck, knowing her puppy was inside. All her training, all her maternal instinct, focused to a single point of purpose. Almost there, Torin muttered, hand steady on the wheel despite the hydroplaning risk. Everyone brace yourselves. This is going to be close. The bridge's approach rose before them, water already creeping across the pavement. Royce's truck hit the span first, sending up sheets of spray. Their headlights caught the sign at the bridge's edge. Load limit 10 tons. The metal weathered and rust-streaked. In the truck bed, Y-13 stood firm against the wind and rain, nose locked on her target. Her focus never wavered, even as thunder cracked overhead and lightning illuminated the valley's flooding reach. The cue from Shepard's determination matched their own, a mother's love and a rescuer's duty combined into unstoppable force. The retention clause remained secured to Torin's dash, their legal lifeline. Nell touched it briefly, drawing strength from its official weight. The document represented everything they fought for, the recognition that some bonds transcended mere ownership, that loyalty deserved protection. They followed Royce onto the bridge, committed now despite the flood warnings and compromised roadbed. Time had compressed to these crucial moments. Whatever came next would happen here, where old concrete spanned angry water while a mother tracked her stolen puppy through the storm's fury. Thunder cracked overhead as they approached the bridge, lightning fragmenting the dark sky into jagged shards of white. The rain hammered down in thick sheets, turning the world into a watery blur. Through the deluge, Royce's red taillights wavered like dying embers. Nell's heart jumped into her throat as Royce's truck hit a deep puddle at speed. The vehicle lurched violently sideways, tires losing their grip on the saturated concrete. A horrible metallic screech cut through the storm's roar as the truck's momentum carried it into a sickening slide. "The crate!" Nell cried out, watching in horror as the puppy carrier in Royce's truck bed tipped precariously. The sound of metal grinding against metal sent chills down her spine. Inside his cab, Royce wrestled with the steering wheel, but it was too late. His engine sputtered and died, leaving the truck stranded halfway across the bridge. Broken planks creaked ominously beneath the tires as the vehicle began an inexorable slide toward the guardrail. A high-pitched yelp of terror pierced the air, the puppy's cry cutting straight to Nell's heart. The sound seemed to galvanize everyone into action at once. Torin reacted with the swift precision of someone used to emergency situations. He yanked the wheel, positioning his truck at a precise angle to create a brace point with his front bumper. In one fluid motion, he was out of the cab, heavy tow strap in hand, moving through the rain toward the guardrail. "Secure it to something solid," Rhea shouted over the storm, her eyes scanning the bridge structure. "Those posts look reinforced." Nell could barely breathe as she watched the scene unfold. Below them, the river had transformed into a monster, a churning mass of dark water filled with debris. Tree branches and other unidentifiable objects shot past in the current, making the water look alive and hungry. Y-13 didn't hesitate for a second. The Shepherd launched herself from their truck bed with athletic precision, landing sure-footed despite the slick surface. She bounded across the space between vehicles and positioned herself against the tilting crate, her strong front paws bracing it against the increasing angle of the truck bed. "Look at her," Hollis called out in amazement. "She's stabilizing it." The shepherd's training was evident in every movement. She'd positioned herself perfectly, using her body weight and strength to prevent the crate from sliding further. Her eyes remained focused, her muscles trembling with effort but holding steady. Rhea was already moving, her experienced gaze assessing the situation with military efficiency. She worked her way along the bridge's edge, testing each section before putting her full weight down. "The surge is getting stronger," she called back. "We need to move fast, but smart. This whole structure could go." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene in stark detail. Royce's truck balanced precariously, Y-13 holding steady against the crate, Torin working to secure the tow strap, and churning water below that seemed to reach up toward them with dark fingers. In the distance, sirens wailed, Deputy Weber and his backup approaching. But the sound kept cutting in and out, competing with massive thunderclaps that shook the bridge's remaining planks. The storm seemed determined to swallow any hope of help arriving in time. "The current's pulling harder," Torin shouted, his hands working quickly with the strap. "Bridge is vibrating." Nell pressed herself against the truck door, torn between the need to help and the knowledge that too many people moving on the compromised structure could make things worse. Her eyes remained fixed on Y-13, marveling at the shepherd's unwavering focus. Even now, facing danger that would send most animals fleeing, the dog's training and maternal instinct combined into something extraordinary. The puppy whimpered again, the sound barely audible above the storm but hitting Nell like a physical blow. She watched as Y-13 responded, adjusting her position slightly to better brace the crate, her movements careful and deliberate despite the chaos around them. Rhea continued her methodical assessment, calling out warnings about debris she spotted in the water. "Watch the approach. Current's undercutting the south side." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded emergency teams through countless crises. The scene felt suspended in time, the truck's slow slide toward disaster, Y-13's steadfast resistance, Torin's desperate work with the tow strap, all of it happening in a bubble of urgent focus while nature raged around them. Every second stretched like taffy, filled with both infinite possibility and immediate danger. Another flash of lightning revealed new cracks spreading across the concrete where Royce's truck had first hit. The bridge's aging structure was being tested beyond its limits by the combination of impact, weight, and rushing water below. The sirens grew slightly louder, then faded again as thunder rolled across the valley. Help was coming, but the bridge's stability was deteriorating with each passing moment. They were alone with physics and courage, fighting against time and nature's fury. Where 13 remained the calm center of the storm, her training evident in every steady breath and braced muscle. She held her position with the same dedication that had once made her an exceptional search and rescue dog. Now, instead of searching for strangers in danger, she was protecting her own puppy with all the skill at her disposal. The river below continued its relentless assault on the bridge's foundations, hurling debris against concrete supports that had stood for decades. Each impact sent subtle vibrations through the structure, a reminder that their time was running desperately short. Thunder cracked overhead as Torin worked with practiced efficiency, his hands steady despite the urgency of the moment. He secured the tow strap to his truck's frame, double-checking the knots even as the bridge trembled beneath them. The river roared below, a hungry beast waiting to swallow anything that fell into its depths. "It's anchored!" Torin called out, his voice barely carrying over the storm. Nell grabbed the other end of the strap, her fingers trembling as she clipped it to her belt. The cold rain pelted her face as she took her first careful step into the floodwater covering the bridge. It swirled around her thighs, then her waist. the current stronger than she'd expected. On Royce's truck, Y13 remained braced against the puppy's crate, her muscles quivering with effort but holding steady. The shepherd's eyes locked with Nell's, showing absolute trust in their shared mission. "Lean into the pull," Rhea shouted from behind. "Let the strap take your weight." Nell pressed forward, the water now reaching her chest. Each step felt like moving through molasses, the current trying to sweep her legs out from under her. The box cutter in her hand seemed to weigh 100 pounds as she fought to keep it above water. The puppy's whimpers grew more frantic as Nell drew closer. Y13 adjusted her stance slightly, ensuring the crate wouldn't shift in these final crucial moments. The shepherd's training showed in every calculated movement, every ounce of strength precisely applied. When Nell finally reached the truck's side, her hands were numb from cold, but her determination burned hot. She could hear Torin and Rhea behind her, maintaining tension on the safety line. The strap was her lifeline, the only thing keeping her from being swept away by the surging water. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her fingers worked at the crate's ties, the box cutter slicing through wet rope and plastic. The puppy pressed against the crate's door, eager to be free. A massive crack of thunder made everyone jump. The bridge groaned ominously beneath them. Y13 never flinched, maintaining her protective stance even as the truck shifted slightly. With one final cut, the crate's door came loose. Nell quickly scooped up the puppy, tucking him securely against her chest. His tiny body trembled, but he stayed quiet, somehow sensing the gravity of the situation. "Got him!" Nell called out. The moment she lifted the puppy, the empty crate broke free. It skidded across the wet truck bed, heading straight for Royce, who had been trying to maintain his balance on the bumper. The impact knocked him off balance, his arms windmilling as he teetered on the edge of disaster. Y13 moved like lightning. The shepherd spun and lunged, ramming her shoulder into Royce's legs. The force of her impact pushed him back onto the truck bed instead of into the raging water. In one fluid motion, she planted her feet and pressed against him, keeping him from rolling toward the river. "Hold on!" Torin's voice boomed as he and Rhea began pulling on the strap. Nell felt the tension increase, helping her fight against the current as she made her way back to safety. Red and blue lights finally cut through the rain as several patrol cars arrived. Deputy Weber jumped out, quickly assessing the situation and organizing his officers into a human chain. They linked arms, creating a secure path for Nell to follow. "Come on, ma'am," Weber called. "Nice and easy." The trip back seemed to take forever, each step carefully placed as the current tried to pull her under. The puppy remained still in her arms, trusting her completely, just as his mother had. Behind them, Y13 kept Royce pinned in place, her training overriding any instinct for revenge. Finally, Nell felt hands grabbing her shoulders, pulling her the last few feet to solid ground. The human chain had worked perfectly, everyone soaked and shaking but safe. The puppy squirmed in her arms, letting out a tiny bark as Y13 appeared beside them, having made sure Royce was secure before leaving her post. The wind continued to howl around them, but they had done it. They had saved not only the puppy, but also the man who had tried to tear this small family apart. With 13 pressed against Nell's leg, her wet fur brushing against Nell's jeans as she stretched up to nuzzle her puppy, proving that her heart was as strong as her training. The rain drummed steadily on metal and asphalt as Deputy Weber held his flashlight over the wrinkled papers, water beading on the protective sleeve Rhea had thought to use. His face grew harder with each line he read of the search and rescue retention clause. "Mr. Bender," he called out, voice cutting through the storm's diminished roar. "Put your hands behind your back." Royce, still dripping from his near fall into the river, tried to argue. "This is ridiculous. I have proper ownership papers." "Fraudulent papers," Weber corrected, the handcuffs clicking shut. "Along with multiple counts of animal cruelty, illegal trafficking of service animals, and falsifying county documents. We've been building this case for months." Hollis appeared through the rain, his uniform soaked dark, and his young face bright with relief. He clutched a waterproof tablet displaying more evidence, records of suspicious transfers and kennel, violations that he'd quietly collected. Near the guardrail, Y13 stood protectively over her puppy and Nell, her body creating a shield against the wind. She wouldn't budge until the EMT finished checking the small bundle in Nell's arms. The puppy, still waiting for his proper name, squirmed and licked his mother's muzzle when she leaned down to inspect him. "Shelter Director Greavy has been notified," another deputy announced, lowering his phone. "She's suspended effective immediately pending investigation into negligent oversight and improper release of protected animals." Rhea stepped forward with her own tablet, her movements precise despite the weather. "I'm logging Y13's correct identity and chain of custody correction now. She'll be officially reinstated in the system as a former SAR asset." Against the bridge's rail, Torin winced as he adjusted the makeshift sling supporting his injured arm, a souvenir from Royce's earlier assault at the shelter. But his eyes were peaceful as he watched justice finally taking shape. "Ma'am, you're cleared," the EMT said to Nell, packing away his penlight. "Just keep that head bump iced tonight." She nodded, never loosening her gentle grip on the puppy. The storm's fury had spent itself, settling into a steady rainfall that pattered against emergency vehicles and the old bridge that had held strong through it all. One by one, the sirens wound down and pulled away, leaving behind only the sound of water and relief. The morning sun streamed through tall courthouse windows, casting warm rectangles across the polished floor. Nell sat straight-backed in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as Judge Martinez reviewed the final documents. The courtroom was nearly empty, just their small group gathered for this moment that would make everything official. Given the evidence presented regarding Y13's service history, the fraudulent nature of previous transfers, and the clear bond demonstrated between these animals and Ms. Covington, Judge Martinez looked up, her eyes kind behind reading glasses. "I hereby grant full custody of both the mother shepherd and her puppy to Nell Covington, with the provision that they follow the certification pathway outlined by Captain Calder." Nell's breath caught. After all the rain and fear and fighting, it came down to these simple words: legal, binding, real. "Thank you, Your Honor," she managed, her voice steady despite the tears threatening. Outside, the spring air was sweet with new leaves. Torin's truck was parked in the courthouse lot, and he was already lowering the tailgate despite his arm being in a proper sling now. He'd spent evenings in his workshop, crafting something special. "Had to get the measurements just right," he said, carefully sliding out a handmade cedar bed. The wood gleamed with multiple coats of finish, the edges smoothly rounded, and the base lined with thick cushioning. "Figure they deserve something built too. Last." Hollis approached from his car, carrying a small box. His usual nervous energy was replaced with quiet pride as he held it out to Nell. Inside lay a new collar, the metal tag catching sunlight. The engraving read simply, Y13. "It's perfect," Nell whispered, running her finger over the letters. "Both of you, thank you." She looked down at the puppy wiggling at her feet, finally ready to give him his proper name. "Ledger," she said clearly, and his ears perked. "Because some debts aren't about money, they're about love and memory and keeping faithful accounts." Rhea stood nearby, watching the scene with approval. She stepped forward, her weathered face gentle. "I've been thinking," she said. "We do therapy visits, you know, for families who've lost firefighters." She paused, letting the words settle. "13 has the right temperament, and sometimes it helps to be with others who understand." Nell felt tears spill then, but they weren't the heavy drops of grief she'd known for so long. "Yes," she said, nodding. "We'd like that." The drive home felt different, not an ending, but a beginning. The cedar bed was secured in her truck bed, Ledger was curled in a travel crate, and Y13 sat regally in the passenger seat, her eyes forward as if she'd always belonged there. Their yard welcomed them with dancing shadows from the oak trees and spring flowers pushing through the soil. Nell unloaded the bed onto the porch while Y13 supervised Ledger's explorations of his new territory. The puppy bounced through patches of sunlight, occasionally tumbling over his own feet in excitement. Finally, everything was settled inside. Nell sat on the porch steps, watching her new family. Y13 pressed against her knee, a solid, warm presence. Ledger had worn himself out and was sprawled half in and half out of the cedar bed, snoring softly. The house behind her had been so quiet for so long, first after losing her husband, then after her son never came home from that terrible fire. But now it hummed with life again. The click of dog nails on hardwood, the jingle of tags, the soft wafts of canine dreams. That first moment in the shelter, when a desperate mother had pushed her baby through the bars into Nell's hands, it had seemed like an ending, but it was really a beginning. A choice made in trust that led to more choices, more trust, more love. Y13 had chosen Nell then, and now Nell had chosen them both, fully and forever. She stroked the shepherd's ears, feeling the strong pulse of life beneath her fingers. "We're home," she whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, the words felt completely true. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.